Welcome back to Conversation with Derek. How you going, Derek?
Hi, we were just saying our little hellos, so it's always fun to restart.
Yeah,
Oh, I haven't
it's
seen
like,
you.
yeah. We're talking about podcasts today, but before I get into it, there is a podcast I listened to where people kept asking, how do they get such good banter in their live shows? And it's like simple. We just don't talk to each other any other time.
That's actually, but that's interesting. What was the podcast that said that?
It's called Chat 10 Look Free, which is an Australian podcast.
Okay.
Like they're friends, but they realize if they start talking, they miss out on all the good conversations they could have for the podcast. So they try and avoid each other any other time.
It's funny because we do, like last week we talked about the Discord, and you and I will chat over, with other folks over the literary Discord throughout the week. What are you reading, or this award or this silly fun thing happened, type of talk. Lately, it's been more like, what are you watching movies? But we never, at the end of the last podcast, you said or at the end of our last video chat, you said we're going to do one on podcasts. And then now will be literally the next time that we talk about that. And so that part, I do like doing that. You know what I mean? Same thing with the bookshelves or social media with reading, we haven't prepped together, so we don't know, we really don't know what the other's thing is. That's a good point about just don't talk to the person.
I think it works better if you don't, because then you don't actually know what each other's going to say. And then it just flows more interesting.
And we had somebody this evening or morning for you, on Twitter asking oh, do these get recorded? And I was like, well, most people watch them recorded, but the fun thing about live is you do get the real reactions and stuff. You can't edit it out, and so there's something to the fact that even if you're watching this later, it's a much more, in my opinion, interesting conversation. You know what I mean? Than if we could cut out all the stupid things that you say.
That I say? Why are you pointing at me?
I'm not feeling very self-deprecating today. So, I took shots.
Yeah, well played. There would be a lot of those to cut out.
You took some shots at one of our newest fans today on Twitter.
I do not like this.
Why does it happen?
Promotion.
I can't stand. So I'm just referencing, and this happens. We both have BookTube channels. Michael obviously has a podcast. I'm sure it happens in the reviews there too. But there's these people who will just seek out. I guess they search podcasts because you hadn't even hashtagged it, and then there's somebody who's like, I just started a brand new rip roaring podcast, man, check me out. And it's these people always find you. I thought it was a bot until he started coming back and forth with me, and I was like, oh god, this is a real person. It sucks.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It just sucks.
I did think it was a bot as well, but I looked at it and it didn't look like a podcast I would listen to.
Oh no, we won't be discussing that one tonight. So if that dude's watching, you don't have to stick with it. But if you're interested in translated lips, then stick around. It's just you've fallen into a pretty niche hole in your attempt to self-promote.
Yeah. I really don't like these cold promotion type things.
Yeah, I don't either. And I get, on YouTube, constantly it's 2 minutes after I posted. This week I posted, I know we're going to talk about podcasts, but I posted the weirdest thing I've ever done on YouTube. A 30-minute multi-scene, multi-part thing where I'm actually acting as opposed to reviewing. I tried something totally different. And I was very honestly nervous about it. I kind of posted it at a low time, because I was super self-conscious about it because it's different, And so you post something like that and you're just kind of in your head about it. And 2 minutes after I posted it, somebody was like, love your content, man. Love it. Whatever. And it's just it's been 2 minutes. I see
you haven't ever seen it. Yeah.
You're promoting or whatever. My cat is never here and is making noise. So we might hear my cat Louie. But yeah, it's just frustrating. You see it, and then like they have another comment always. It's like, just want to join before you hit 100 subscribers or whatever. And it's like, what is the purpose?
We should collaborate.
Yeah. What is the purpose of this? Like,
there seems to be a huge increase of those on YouTube at the moment.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. I mean, I'm deleting 5. I have a tiny channel, which must be. I do wonder if they'd go after smaller channels on purpose, but I have a tiny channel, and I'm probably deleting 5 comments each time. You know what I mean? So
I don't know if you got them big enough, but do you get like emails or requests to review a self-published book often?
No, although I did get, and I think this is more from my Twitter. Like, even though I do BookTube, I think I'm maybe better at Twitter in some ways. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm more like myself or whatever. And anyway, I did get an actual publisher like respond to me for the first time asking if I would review something.
Yeah.
And I said no. And I think I'm going to stick with that.
Well, yeah, whatever. I mean, if it was Deep Vellum, you might say yes.
Yeah, exactly. But like,
Open Letter.
Yeah, but Open Letter and Deep Vellum, 2 great examples, and Charco, like those 3 I subscribe to. So yeah, I'm going to get their books. Like, they don't need that. And they're not the type that would, I'm guessing they're not the type that market that way. That's my assumption. Do you know what I mean? But this was for a translated literature book. I mean, it was a big house. Do you know what I mean? So I know that like there's somebody like in marketing who just, like saw, there's somebody on YouTube who reviews translated literature. We have one that's translated. Let's send that to them. And I'm assuming that there's people that's their jobs, is to like find that, and maybe, and I know that other people have like experienced that way more. It's just, to me, was surprising because of the size, my channel, like, even if I love something, maybe could I sell you 2 books? So why is it even worth the effort? Do you know what I mean? To like, but maybe it's just a numbers game. Like, you do it enough or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. It definitely is. Sometimes it feels that way.
I mean, did you ever like, do you get arcs ever and stuff through like your blog, your podcast? Because you have a whole lot more media.
Obviously. Not as much as I used to.
Okay.
But every now and then, I think World Editions just send me random stuff.
Yeah.
Unsolicited.
Yeah.
Because they've got my address now, so they'll just send stuff.
Yep.
Which is cool. Deep Vellum has sent me a couple.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is strange because they're tiny press in Texas.
Yeah. Tiny press. I mean, like, I think a 2 to 5 person operation,
Yeah.
But like Charco, and I think that those 2 are similar in some ways. Like Charco, they're very attuned to like their fan base, I'd call it. They know who likes their stuff, and I think are pretty smart about like reaching out and being like, both of those presses were like super supportive from before I reviewed one of their books. Does that make sense? Like, before I reviewed one of their books, they're automatically like, oh, you're interested in translated literature. Like, they kind of like get that, you know what I mean? And so it doesn't totally surprise me, although that is a huge expense if they're shipping books, obviously, to Australia.
Yeah. It is very strange, but
okay, so we're going to talk about that. We got way off. I'm sorry.
Well, sorry, yeah. Well, let's start with, why do you love podcasts, I guess?
I have a long history with it. Ricky Gervais, who I'm not a fan of, had a podcast with Stephen Merchant when there was like no podcasts. I mean, do you remember it? Did you listen to it at all?
No. I'm not a fan of either, but
I'm not a fan of either of those. But here, I don't know culturally if they got to you sooner, but they did. It took a long time here before we knew one that Gervais was a total asshole, I mean, or whatever. Like, just like not I don't know. I think that is the right word. But
Yeah.
yeah. And Merchant was just not funny, right? So like you combine the two. But anyway, they had just done, I think, the British Office. The American Office hadn't even started. And so I had seen the British Office, I had laughed. It was funny. And they had a podcast. I didn't even know what that was. I listened to a few of them and I just liked it. I used to be obsessed with this show in America called Coast to Coast AM, the radio show.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that? Okay, so there was
why would I?
well, because it ended up becoming, I think, I could be wrong, but I think it ended up becoming culturally much bigger than just America because it went on internet radio and then eventually kind of a podcast form. But anyway, this guy, Art Bell, was in Nevada, and he was kind of a UFO conspiracy, like weird, just kind of nut personality, but he was very good at like bringing out the bizarre, and in a way to where it's like he didn't show an opinion on something, but he would just, you'd get these fascinating characters and stuff like that. So anyway, I liked that audio medium for a long time when things weren't happening. Here in America, the show Serial was when podcasts blew up. When I was at Fame in Australia.
That seemed to be the time it took off. But I think I started with My Dad Wrote a Porno.
Okay, so I love My Dad Wrote a Porno. I'm so glad we talk about this stuff. I'm so glad. Okay. So I love My Dad Wrote a Porno. And I am a very, very scared flyer. And I have to fly for my job like 3 to 4 times a year. And when I discovered that one, they were already on season 2. And I was getting ready to fly. I had taken my little pill that's supposed to make it a little better, but doesn't totally work. And it was the first time I had ever had an enjoyable flight because I put on season 1, and I don't remember why I found it or something. I just saw somebody mentioned it or whatever, and I, like, next to a complete stranger, laughed the entire time, like could not stop. Like it was incredible. And for people who, if you're watching this, like looking for something, if you never listened to that one, like you would be in for such a treat to start it from the beginning. With no knowledge. So that's funny. So so Serial here is what blows it up. By that point, I had already tried 2 different podcasts. So I had one where I tried to do like a comedy podcast with somebody. Didn't work out. Schedules never happened. And I then did like an artsy podcast where I would read my writing over stuff, but it was like noir writing, right? So I would try to do base it off like old time detective series type stuff. And truthfully, it was just like YouTube is much easier when it comes to the technical side of things. Man, Audacity, like learning that program and the uploading, and I was like mixing in free royalty-free music because I was trying to make it sound like a radio show. It was just a ton of work, so I stopped doing it. So I was already interested personally in that medium. Serial comes in, it blows up, and then at this point now, I mean, I listen to probably 5 to 6 hours a week of podcasts just because that's that's the entertainment form I like. How did you get into it other than I wrote a porno? Or my dad?
I think after that I kind of like moved into like listening to Serial and S-Town. Did you listen to S-Town?
Yeah, and S-Town is one of my favorite pieces of art. Like legitimately. I actually don't care for Serial that much. And I'll just like
I stopped listening, I think, after the first season.
Yeah, first season, good story, but I'm not huge into true crime, which is what like blew up here.
Yeah.
In fact, I mentioned this in a previous conversation of ours, but the true crime podcast I like is hosted by an Australian guy who I believe lives in Queensland, and it is called Cold Case Files, I think. It is always in the top 10, and I can, it pulls up here. It is a very.
What podcast app do you use?
I just use Apple. I've tried a bunch of different ones. It's called, Case File True Crime.
Okay.
I've tried a bunch of different ones, and I haven't liked anything as much as I just use the embedded Apple app. Do you like one better?
Oh, I'm obsessed with Pocket Cast.
Okay, all right. I moved to Spotify for a bit, but I didn't like it.
No, Spotify's not good. What I like about Pocket Cast is you can like customize how episodes are added. So like for one show, it's like, yeah, add it to the top of my queue because I want to listen to that next automatically. But for other shows, it's like, no, put that at the bottom of my queue.
That's cool. I like that. And I haven't tried that one. So I tried Stitcher for a minute, didn't like it. Tried Spotify, hated it. So I just have stuck with Apple. Honestly, just because, I mean, how did you move over? Like, because what I'd like to do is just like press a button and say, here's all my podcasts. Because I have a lot. Like,
yeah. Well, I got annoyed with the Apple Podcast app, and I was looking for one where I could play it on my computer at work.
Okay, yep.
And it'll sync up to where I was up to. Mm-hmm. So I found this app.
Yeah.
Which is now gone, like, you had to pay for the app originally.
Yeah.
But now it's like they've got a free version and they've got a paid version, like a subscription. So because I bought the app originally, I've got a lifetime subscription. So that's been pretty cool.
That's cool. Yeah. So S-Town, I'll just say briefly, the character that they study in that, I mean, I loved him, you know, and I loved, I thought it was very literary. So did you like S-Town as the follow-up there?
Yeah, I really love S-Town.
Yeah, I've actually listened to that one again. I rarely would re-listen to a podcast, but I wanted to hear his rants. I mean, here was a guy who was in, and as you know, I'm in North Carolina. I'm in the South. I grew up in the South, and you know, it was not like I'm a straight white dude, you know, but the people that I was friends with or knew that were not in that category had a much tougher existence, obviously, here. And here was somebody who, you know, was a gay older man, clearly had come up in a time and in a different type of South, too, because his South was deeper than mine. You know, I'm in what's kind of a mid-Atlantic where it's a little bit more liberal, you know, socially, where he was in deep South. He's gay. He's obviously very intelligent. He's got all these like forward-thinking ideas on climate change years before, you know, they're like everyone understands them. But then he also has, and this is one of the things that I find I like in any kind of medium, he has a very specific knowledge of something arcane. And I love that. Like in this case, it was watches, right? Like, or clocks. Like, and I always thought that's so cool. So everything about that character I was really interested in. And then, of course, it was a sad story, well told. I think it spun from This American Life, and This American Life is one of the best, you know, always, I think, you know, podcasts, even if sometimes it's a little yuppie.
I don't listen to This American Life. The name doesn't appeal to me.
I can understand why. I still listen to it because it's you know, a story a week, you know, and it can be hit or miss, but the ones that are hit, you know, they're really good. And it's nice because you can kind of tell pretty quickly, like within 10 minutes or so, you can skip it, you know, or through a description, you skip it. You know, if I had that app you're talking about, like, it would definitely be on the bottom rung of ones, but I have listened to some of the best episodes through that, you know, because that is, the show is essentially like the guy who did S-Town, he's a This American Life producer. Serial, she was a This American. So they just came out of that.
Yeah.
Started off being This American Life shows, and then it was like, well, this is too big. Let's make our own podcast. So if you could just imagine a couple interesting things like that are an hour long, you know, that's kind of the vibe.
Yeah.
All right. So what else do you listen to now, regular? Well, here's one I really like first. I have to ask you, what's one that you used to listen to and now you just can't do it anymore?
Good question. I feel like with literary podcasts, they like come and go.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Like sometimes you like really enjoy a podcast, and then it kind of gets a little too much the same. It's like, oh, they run out of steam.
Yep.
So, like, I feel like there are a lot of literary podcasts which I'll subscribe and then unsubscribe a bit later.
Yeah, that happens to me with literary podcasts only because I'll subscribe because they'll maybe go on a run of talking about books I like, and then that run ends. You know what I mean? Like, so that definitely happens. I mean, in fact, I mean, there's only 3 literary podcasts I listen to regularly.
What are they?
Lost in Translations, which is how I found which is how I found you and your stuff. Open Letters, you know, which we've talked about, the 3%.
One, yeah.
Yep, the Chad Post, Tom Roberts. That's another one where it's their interaction that makes it, you know.
Yeah.
They had an episode. Did you listen to the episode this week with the booksellers?
Yeah, I subscribed to Christina because she seemed to hate every book. Not subscribed, like followed her on Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty great. So I really liked that. That was a really good format too. But and then the other one is Bookworm. I've always listened to Bookworm.
I don't know that one.
Michael,
what's that one?
Michael Silverblatt is. I want to make sure I'm saying his name right. Here, he is a pretty big critic, reviewer, whatever. So his is
it a radio show?
It is. Yeah, it's a radio show. Yep. It's on NPR here, which is our national public radio.
Yeah.
And then it's also as a Bookworm. Yeah, KCRW is the. And so, so most recent episode is on Benjamin Moser, who's a complicated figure. Yeah. But the one before that is Daniel Kelman for Till. And his is they're 30 minutes long, and he just has an author, and they describe their work. They talk about the work. So what's nice about it is that, like, well, immediately you know if you're going to skip it or not.
Yeah.
But he is an incredible interviewer. I mean, he's really, really good, and he is so well read that hearing him describe the work is usually more interesting, actually, than the author, him or herself.
Like, I don't really enjoy like the professional approach to literary podcasts.
Yeah,
I much prefer the, like the 3% post where the approach where you just go in there, have a conversation. The episode.
I do too. I've just never found them. So maybe you're going to educate me today.
One that I found interesting is Overdue. Have you ever listened to Overdue by?
I have, yep. And I think they have a very good rapport.
Yeah.
I just find myself, it came off my feed not long ago after I think I had gone 6 months without being interested in anything they were reading.
Well, they don't read lots of interesting books. I just like the jokes they make about the books.
Yeah.
So basically, so the premise is one person reads a book and then tries to explain it to the other person what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And the other person's just making jokes about it.
Okay, so now I'm recalling that better. And yeah, I don't know why. I guess, like, I remember liking the podcast and listening to it a little bit. It's definitely on my feed, but I haven't listened to it in a long time. I think it's because I kept looking at the books and wasn't realizing that it was the rapport itself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not like they're reviewing the book. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's interesting. I might give that a shot again. Because I had always thought of it as like, we're going to read the classics. Like, we're going to read all of them. You know what I mean? And then I guess I didn't really realize or had forgotten that there was the humor aspect to it.
Yeah, and
But
they do kind of have that approach of we're going to read the classics, but I think what makes them interesting is that we're not going to review it. We're just going to have a conversation and make fun of it, kind of thing.
yeah. Okay, well, maybe worth a try.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Have you listened to Literary Disco?
No, I have not.
All right, Literary Disco is three people. One is Ryder Strong, who used to be an actor, child actor, who was in Boy Meets World.
One of my favorite shows. Okay, odd.
Tom Goldberg is a crime writer. He writes a lot of generic type of crimes novels. He wrote novelizations of Burn Notice.
Okay, yeah.
But he's also a college professor, and Julie Pastel is the other person. So she used to work at the I can't remember which. She used to work at like a literary house type thing.
Okay.
Like a historical place for a famous American writer. I can't remember which one. So they're just three friends just having conversations about books.
So is it a different book each week? Like, what's their format?
Well, yeah, they start off, maybe they'll have a literary game, which is like pick a random book. So go to shelf this one and go 10 books in, and let's pull that book out and we'll talk about it.
Yep.
And then they'll discuss the book that they want to discuss.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's all over the place. Like they'll do a Babysitter's Club book, or they'll do Middlemarch.
Yeah.
So it's like but it's interesting because it's just three people like on a Skype conversation, just talking about books.
Yeah. All right. I'm adding that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that one's a good one. I don't know if you've heard So Many Damn Books.
Yep. So Many Damn Books. Yep. I have. Yeah. I mean, here's my other thing with podcasts, and this literary podcast, like, definitely kind of get a short end of the shaft for this reason. I usually give podcasts 2 or 3 episodes, unless like someone's recommended it so much where you're like, okay. And so a couple of these, and that's one. Another one for me would be Boss, Books of Such Substance or So Much Substance. Okay. Where maybe I just listened to the wrong episodes to begin with, because I know people really like them, but like nothing ever grabbed me. I have nothing negative to say, just like I could not, I have it, I see it in my feed that I've listened to 3 of them, but like I don't remember anything about them, So give me the scoop on that.
Yeah. Oh, So Many Dead Books. There was just 2 people that met in the Tournament of the Books comments.
Yep.
So basically they kept chatting and discussing the books. So they decided because they're in the same sort of area, they started this podcast where they just took what they were doing, where they were just discussing books, and turned it into a podcast.
Yep.
Normally they get like a author on who discusses the book they've just recently published. But they also bring a book that they've recommended to them, and they discuss that.
And so I'm looking, like the last one, I did listen to one this year. It looked like I listened to top 8 of 2019. So another guess I may have is that, like, I mean, God, who reads like the stuff that we read? You know what I mean? So like, I wonder if that's like part of the aspect that like so many of the literary podcasts are focused on stuff I don't read, where like, even if I like it, it's like, well, it just doesn't lead me. Have you ever listened to Tin Houses one?
No, I haven't.
There's another interview one. I just had it up here. It is, and this is again hit or miss because it's an interview one. Like their most recent one is this Hennef, and I can't really say his last name, but he's like a poet and cultural critic here in America. Between the Covers is the name of it.
I don't know that one. No.
Yeah, Between the Covers with David Nyman from Tin House Books. And it's definitely one worth subscribing to just because occasionally you'll have like, like Mark Haber from Reinhardt's Garden, April 1st, who's like that awesome bookseller writer at Brazos, is always a good.
Yeah.
Good
on Twitter.
Yeah, great on Twitter. Garth Greenwell, Cleanliness, Carmen Mario Machado in the Dream House. Those are all back to back to back. So like more, we're getting more towards the stuff that I'm interested in. There is, I will just say, a little too much poetry stuff. Of course, I'm not like big into, you know what I mean? So I skip a lot of those. But Richard Powers' Overstory, I mean, I'm just looking through the ones that I like. Like that one's a good one. But again, I think it probably falls more like in the bookworm where I'm listening to, more of that like produced, and you're like having more fun with it, if it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Interesting, because I think of yours as more in that vein. Do you know what I mean? Like in the vein of like, we're going to discuss a book or I'm going to interview a translator or do you know what I mean? Like,
definitely not the approach I take.
Yeah, but you interview translators and then or you'll discuss a book like it, so it seems more prepared in a good way. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't seem as like jokey, I should say.
Yeah, the last one that I would recommend is Backlisted.
Okay.
Which is basically they take really old books and like discuss it. They're the same where they have like a conversation about a book and they get a guest in to like join in on the conversation who's maybe like had a more bigger experience with that book or that author.
Yep.
I think they're maybe running out of steam, that podcast, but like I enjoy it. The thing about bookish podcasts is there's not many out there that read books that I actually want to read.
Right. All right, I just pulled this one out. All right, so I've never listened to this one at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's. I really, the type of podcasts that I feel like the same way, of course, about Larry podcasts, and I actually think that the Larry podcast I love or whatever probably just like doesn't exist,
Yeah.
But I really like the concept of the 2-month review, like we talked about before, like where you're going to read a book with someone else.
Yeah.
And discuss it in parts. Now, I think it should be quicker and, you know what I mean? I think there's definite tweaks to it. But as a reader, anytime I'm reading something that's kind of big, it would be a lot of fun to have those pause moments and sit and listen to people discuss it. The issue, like 2-month review, I'm not calling it an issue, but like it is a publisher run podcast. So, I mean, I know they've done some non-open letter books, but I mean, the purpose is but I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that, but like that's what the purpose is, right? So and and then I have seen before, like looking around, there's some where they're like, well, let's read Infinite Jest. Well, now like I don't want to do that. Do you know what I mean? So like, it's like, but I do like that aspect where you're reading something over a period of time to where as a listener, you can kind of come in and, all right, through 4 episodes, we're going to read a 500-page book, Yeah. The stuff I typically haven't liked, which is probably why I wasn't as much into Overdue, is like just sort of riffing on books that you had to read to school or something. You know what I mean? Like, because I'm not that interested in that kind of literature anymore, like.
Yeah, I guess it depends what you're interested in a podcast.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I don't get my literature much from podcasts. You know what I mean? Like I really, really like history podcasts. So like The Maritime History is one of the podcasts I really like. My favorite podcast is Revolutions by Mike Duncan, who is the guy who did the History of Rome podcast. Like, so I like really like, I think, more highly produced, in-depth sort of stuff, and find like some of what I think you like, or it sounds like you like when it comes to Leary podcast, the sort of bantering back and forth. Like, I get a good sense of that on Twitter. But you just don't like Twitter. Like, that's the problem.
I don't mind Twitter. I just think it's too American.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
There's a lot of Donald Trump stuff going on all
Yeah,
the
see,
time.
when I came back, I muted about 8 words to do with him. So
Yeah.
luckily, I actually do not see that much at all. I'm very lucky. Like, that's how I was able to do Twitter again. Because I mean, we can't like have news. Like, I can't watch news, and I dropped all of that aspect of my life. You know what I mean? Like, I know it sounds terrible, but like, I have to have good mental health. You know what I mean? Like, I can't, I can't do that. So, so that's a good point.
Yeah, but I said this before. I think like the conversation part of Twitter is starting to die, and that's a problem that I find with it.
Yeah, I can kind of. I mean, I think since this reiteration of me coming back, it still has a newness to me this time around. Every other time that I tried to mess with Twitter, I tried to follow a little bit of all of my interest, but then also use it as a breaking news thing. So, real life, the Trump, all that stuff. So this is the first time where I was like really hyper focused, and I was like, okay, I have one interest really, like I'm only going to focus on that. And so I've gotten to enjoy it a lot more. And I do see, like, I feel like good conversation, but it is, there is still something to it being all very American, because like outside of a few people, I mean, they're all in my time zone even. Do you know what I mean? Like, that are discussing it. So that is kind of true. I mean, and I can see that. Although oddly, like, and I don't know if it's from following Damon from the beginning or whatever, like I do follow a lot of Australian readers that are into translated literature. And do you think it should be the country?
Yeah. Well, it'll be Damon and probably Unwise Trousers.
And then Tony Messenger.
Tony is in English.
He's in England? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought he was in
Australia. No, actually, sorry, Tony Messenger is in Melbourne. Yeah, he's Australian. Sorry.
What about Greg Kendall?
Greg Kendall. He might be English.
He might be English.
I'm not sure. Yeah, but there are actually a few Australians. There is another Tony. Tony's reading list, I think.
Yep. And I've wondered, like, if it's just because you're, like, culturally you're so much more open than this country to exploring outside your borders. You know what I mean? Because it's one country, it's an island. Do you know what I mean? Like, whereas here, like, we're so state and regionally obsessed.
Yeah.
And also believe in, I don't know if there's such a thing as Australian exceptionalism, but obviously there is in America. You know what I mean? And like, there is? Okay. All right. So, I mean, is there
probably not to the extent you got in America.
But is there like a fervent nationalist movement going on right now, like everywhere else in the world, or no? That's good.
There is.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Don't really want to go into politics, but yeah, the patriotism of America just baffles me completely.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's totally baffling to me. It's been baffling to me since I was old enough to understand, at 7. I was really proud of when my 6-year-old son came home and was like, why do we do the Pledge of Allegiance, every morning? Like that, like those are the right questions to ask. But anyway, so
back to podcasts.
Back to podcasts. And just my point being that when I see there's so many Australian readers that are reading outside the borders, I just assumed it was something about the geography itself, like a comfort with, we are a Western country culturally, but in the Far East, and like all of those kind of like elements.
I think it's more that we've all kind of connected to each other in some way on Twitter. So
Gotcha.
it seems like there's a lot, but it's just that group.
It's the algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
All right,
Are there any other podcasts?
What are some non-literary podcasts that you like?
Well, I'm currently obsessed with Best Pick.
Okay. And so is it going through the winner or the nominees for Best Picture?
So every week they pick out a Best Picture winner, Oscar Best Picture winner out of the hat, and they watch it. So the format is basically, the first part of the podcast is we'll talk about what was happening in that year in cinema and at the Oscars.
Okay.
Then they'll go watch a movie. Then they'll talk about that movie and decide whether or not if the Academy got it right by picking that movie.
So they talk about the other nominees because they're discussing that year in cinema. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And they talk about what was the box office hits and stuff like that.
Okay.
I really enjoy it.
Is it the banter? Is that what makes that one?
Well, definitely the banter, but they are like really, really knowledgeable about cinema.
Yeah.
And about the movies.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got like the background knowledge definitely helps in this case.
Yeah. So I listened, and I had told you just a while back when you were asking about film podcasts, I think, on the Discord, but I listened to Film Spotting for many, many years and liked it quite a lot. I think they're based out of Chicago. And they do 2 new releases each episode.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, kind of lists that are around the releases. And the reason I fell off is I found myself disagreeing with their opinion so much it drove me crazy. Midsommar, they hated, or the one who reviewed hated it. And then what was the other? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, hated, and those were my 2 favorite movies. Well, Parasite, I guess. So those were, they did love Parasite, but everybody loves Parasite.
Yeah.
So anyway, and they were curmudgeonry, and I found this to be the case with so much film podcast, is that like they take a lot of the fun out, you know what I mean, like of watching the film by making it too technical or too focused on like meaning and symbolism as opposed to like, the feeling of watching the movie, if that makes sense. I feel the same way about literary criticism, though. Like, I don't like stuffiness in that, because this is all just entertainment.
Like, that sounds awesome, but that's not the experience I got from my attempt of listening to Film Spotting.
No, it wasn't. That's definitely what I got.
Well, I've only listened to 1 episode, so I feel like, I don't really know these people, so I don't really like understand their opinions or what they're trying to do. So that doesn't help. But I listened to the episode where they talked about Parasite.
And did you enjoy the episode?
Sorry?
Did you enjoy the episode?
I feel like it kind of dragged.
Okay. Yep.
Like, it was more an academic type of approach where it's like, this is what I gotten from it. This is the techniques and all that kind of stuff.
And that's exactly what I mean. Like, that approach is what turns me off. Like, that's what I'm like kind of referencing, is that academic and technical approach. Yeah, makes it not as much fun.
Like, I appreciate some of that aspects, but I didn't get the impression that they actually enjoy movies.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. So is Best Picture? I mean, are you get that like love of film? Like,
oh yeah, they're definitely film nerds.
Yeah,
they are in a big way, like passionate about films. And what I like is they're 3 different people, and they've got the confidence to disagree with each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that confidence to have an opinion and not be swayed by the other two's opinions. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. I think that's important in any kind of criticism, because
definitely.
Otherwise, what ends up happening, and it's interesting that the Oscars is a great example because, every single year there's sort of a life cycle of hype when it comes to the Best Picture. And then at the end of it, when you look back, so right now I'm thinking of Shakespeare in Love, Crash, these that look bad, right? Like, especially when you compare it to some others I think Shakespeare in Love was the same year as Pulp Fiction. I could be wrong, but like that was an egregious year. I know.
It was Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction.
Okay, Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction. Okay, yeah, that's right. I knew there was a famous one that with like Pulp Fiction. But so those it's interesting. All right, what happens, I feel like, with a lot of criticism here is that it ends up coalescing around an opinion, whatever that opinion is, and that's to the detriment when you can't disagree. And like one example is like I've heard some pretty good, not dislikes of Parasite, but like criticism of Parasite, saying, hey, this movie is very good, but he has made this movie before. And so
it is the topic he revisits,
Yeah, and so what is it about this movie that is in particularly, special or whatever, or is it just, it finally got sort of the marketing budget and the whatever? And I think that's a pretty good point.
Yeah.
And I like hearing that because too often, and I think Parasite was a worthy winner, but like too often sometimes like it becomes groupthink or whatever with some of those winners. And the same thing happens, with not so much the Booker, or because that's a little smaller of a prize, I think, but like the National Book Award, when that happens here.
Of course, you have to go the American Award.
But it's a bigger award, isn't it?
No, only in America.
Only in America? See, this is my problem.
Yeah. Everywhere else, the Booker is a bigger award than.
So embarrassed. Well, that's one I follow, and I don't know who won the National Book Award last year, thankfully. But I don't know. Maybe it's that there's just way less people interested in books than film. I mean, that could be more the case. But I don't hear. But I think the same thing still happens. Margaret Atwood won part of the Booker last year, right? And I'm not here to say like yes or no or whatever, but come on. But no, right? And like you talk about like what an award should be and stuff like that. It's like it wasn't even for the book. You know what I mean?
No.
You know what I mean? Like and that happens too with film where who the Coen brothers have won, right? I'm trying to think. True Grit, maybe?
I don't think they have one.
Oh, have they not? Okay. I thought True Grit won, but maybe they didn't. And it could have been one of those years where they get Best Director, but then not Best Picture,
I think they've won Best Screenplay and Best Director a few times, but I don't think they've ever won Best Picture.
God, that's crazy to think about.
Which one would you give it to?
I'd have to see the year, but Fargo is a heavy contender. I mean, Fargo is one of the best movies ever. And then I think that's the only one because I do remember the No Country for Old Men year, and there are a couple of better ones.
Maybe No Country for Old Men one. That's the only one that I think, actually, maybe that did win.
And Fargo is not that's not my favorite personal Coen Brothers movie. I just mean that one, that's the Best Picture winner, right? I mean, it feels like that should, No
Country of Old Men did win.
It did win, yeah. So that's what actually what I was like kind of getting at was that there becomes those awards, and I'm not comparing the Coen Brothers to Margaret Atwood, but they're like kind of lifetime achievement things. You know what I mean? Where it's like No Country for Old Men is a good movie. It's entertaining. And some people may love it. I do not love it. And I personally think that, like, it's middle of the road for them. I mean, but that one wins, like.
Yeah, well, one day we'll do a conversation about films and we'll get into the Coen Brothers a lot more.
Yeah.
But I would love to see a podcast about films where it's not just the new releases or it's not the big blockbusters all the time. I'd like to see one about classic cinemas, one that's interesting, or one about world cinema. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, there's a podcast here called The Rewatchables on the Ringer podcast network, and they rewatch like mostly like bad 80s and 90s movies, sometimes good, but like action stuff and whatever. I do wish I could find the right one of those that did Criterion level or classics or whatever.
Yeah.
I have never looked. The Criterion Channel might have a podcast, which would be interesting, if it's or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think that would be cool to follow along with somebody's journey, because the thing about film as opposed to books is like you can just get so much more done. You know what I mean? Like it would take us a whole lot longer to read every Booker winner than it would, to watch every Best Picture.
Yeah, that's true. Are there any other podcasts you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I like a lot of them. They're weird. So I really like The Partially Examined Life. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't.
So one of the things that I'm really interested in is philosophy, and The Partially Examined Life takes a philosophical text, and usually like over 3 episodes, there's 4 guys, and they like made it in varying levels of their degree. So like some people made it to a master's, some only the, whatever. And they're in, so, but they still like it kind of, you know what I mean? So like they not kind of, they definitely like still love talking philosophy. So they'll take these huge, Plato, Aristotle, all the big whatever names, and then throughout all of philosophical history, and then they'll read these sections, and over like 3 episodes, so maybe 3 hours long, they'll discuss it. Well, so for me, like I really like philosophy, but I can't read Wittgenstein and know what he's talking about. I'm not smart enough, and I don't like think like that. Like it doesn't make sense to me. So one thing that I love about a podcast like that is that I'm getting that information, but it's like being explained, and it's not like an explained like a 5-year-old, because these people are smart, but it's a conversation between people, it's really engaging. The issue with it is, there's a level to how much that seriousness you can listen to over, what I mean? So it's not a binge-worthy podcast. Like, maybe one a week is like a pretty good amount to listen to.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things is when you find, My Dad Wrote a Porno, where like you can just listen, to kind of a whole arc, you know what I mean? And just like get so much S-Town, where you can just like listen all the way through. But The Partially Examined Life is absolutely one of my favorites. The History of England, I told you I love historical ones. The History of England was great. And then, so did you ever listen to the History of Rome one, the Mike Duncan?
No.
So that was one of the first ones here also that like got really big and really popular. And he now lives in Paris, but he is a professional podcaster for real, which is crazy. And his latest series is called Revolutions. And he goes through, he's on his last one, the Russian Revolution, but he went through in history, to do the French Revolution, the Mexican Revolution, and these little series are like 20 episodes long, and they start from like, here are the conditions that were going on, and then here were the different factions, and it's like reading an incredibly dense, beautiful novel. He's just really good at telling the story, and he's funny, so it's like not totally dry, like it keeps you engaged. Well, anyway, so Revolutions is one of my favorites, but he did the History of Rome, which is, I don't know how many hours. I mean, I'd have to look, but I mean, I worked as a receptionist at a law firm in my very early 20s that like no one ever came into. So I would like sit at this desk and like the phone would ring sometimes, but that was kind of it. It was a very boring job. And I had an earphone where I would just listen to him for hours and hours and hours. And it's a really fond memory because like it was a crappy time in life, you know what I mean? And he like taught me the history of Rome through, you know what I mean? Like 2 years. It was kind of cool. Like, so
that sounds interesting. Yeah. Like, I'm curious because I'd like to learn a bit about the history of Rome.
Yeah.
So I might do that. The only history podcast I can find in my list is The Dollop.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is probably not history, it's more comedy. But yeah, they just take a weird thing in history and just talk about it and break it down.
So I listened to I'm going to ignore the 4 super far left political ones. We're going to ignore that. The History of England, the Maritime History podcast, I like a lot. Let's see, where's the other? The Great Detectives of Old Time Radio. So this is replays of those like 1930s, 1950s radio stuff. So Philip Marlowe is one of them, Dragnet, stuff like that. These are each like 30 minutes long, and they're kind of hit or miss. The ones that I really like are called Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, who's like a insurance adjuster or something.
Okay.
Those are fun because like you get kind of the same thing from like a cheap 5-cent noir, but in a 30-minute like sound bite. You know what I mean? So I like that. Let's see what I'm skipping boxing. I'm a boxing fan, so I have some weird boxing ones. Those are going to be no interest. Laser Time is one that I really like. Have you listened to Laser Time?
I don't know it. No.
Laser Time is another one of those banter shows. You know, it's just it's kind of a different topic, whatever. But they are. I think it started off talking about like 90s and 80s video games, maybe, but that's kind of their vibe. I mean, just kind of geekish, dorky, whatever. But you know, they're funny. You can kind of fall into it. One of my favorite podcasts stopped 2 years ago. I said I didn't like true crime, but there was one I did like, which was not always about crime. It was always about a mystery, and it was 3 people, a girl and 2 guys. And now, as I start,
pizza place.
What was it?
And a pizza place.
And now that I've like said that out loud, I cannot remember the name of it.
Like, I'm just looking at some of the other ones. I've got a translated Chinese fiction podcast, which is interesting.
That's kind of cool.
He's a Scottish man that used to live in China, and he's just talking about his passion of Chinese literature. I've got a lot of weird ones that I haven't really tried, like the Lonely Palette is an interesting one, which is basically it's a museum where they interview guests and ask them what a painting means.
Yep.
And then the curator of the painting will go and talk about the history of the painting and what they get.
Yep.
Well, I don't know art criticism, but I just found it interesting to listen to them talk about a painting.
Yeah, I listened to I think 2 of those and liked them. I think there was a actress from the show Broad City who was on one of them. And went into the museum to explain one of the pictures she liked, and it was abstract art, so it was something that I just knew nothing about, and it was cool. I mean, one of the things I like, and this works for podcasts too, is anybody who has a serious passion about something, I don't actually have to share that passion to like get into it if someone else kind of draws you in. That's an interesting one, a good one. So did you ever do true crime ones or no?
Apart from like Serial, I have a couple on my thing to try, like Chinatown and Heaven's Gate.
Okay, yep. So I've done some cult ones like that. Those are usually typically pretty good. But like a huge one here is My Favorite Murder, which is like comedy plus true crime. I tried that for a while.
I think the biggest one here was called Teacher's Pet.
Teacher's Pet. Okay, this is two like feminists who go through a murder and they like are funny, So and they're comedians, both of them. But it just gets, the problem with true crime is it gets too repetitive and the crime is kind of the same. Like, a man murders a woman, you know what I mean? So it's like at a certain level, like those kind of get like depressing to listen to, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we have three different interests in podcasts. I like
it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. What I love about podcasts is basically anyone can do it. Well,
yeah.
It's like you've got a passion for something. You can just record a podcast and put it out to the world.
Yeah.
And there's so many, I don't know how to find new good ones, but there's so many out there.
Yeah. I think that's part of the challenge too, is that, even as a creator and as a listener, like, how do you connect those things? You know what I mean? Like, you talk about like not really necessarily finding that perfect literature podcast, and it's a huge world out there. That thing could actually exist. You know what I mean? Like,
it can.
Yeah.
The only other podcast that I didn't mention that I'll probably recommend to you is called Think in Translation.
Okay.
Which is a podcast by Vagabond Voices.
Okay. Yep.
And they just had a couple of interviews with like people, translators.
Mm-hmm.
Still waiting for season 2 from them, but that's one you might enjoy.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Nice.
All right. I don't know what we're going to do next week, but we'll work that out at a later time.
Figure it out. At some point, we'll have to do films, although we're going to have to break that up into some sort of category.
How are we going to... Maybe we could just do films and see what comes of it.
What are you reading this week? Let's finish with that, since we are supposedly bookish.
Same thing as always. I haven't finished the book in weeks.
Okay. Yeah, I got
out of that.
Good run. I finished the Perec, immediately finished Death in Spring over a night and a half.
Did you enjoy Death in Spring?
I really did. Yeah. And I'm going to review that one and really talk about Midsommar, of course, and also Wicker Man, because it's just you've got to. But I do think that it felt unfinished. Which I guess it was unfinished.
She hadn't finished it. She died before.
Okay,
but she's been working on it for like 40 years.
And that part's crazy because it's not that long of a book.
No.
But anyway,
that's a lot of rewriting,
And then I will finish 77 probably tomorrow, which has been awesome. Like, I didn't know about this. That was one where I didn't know anything about it until BTBA. Even though it was an open letter one, I think I hadn't been subscribed yet, and I thought it was just a kind of standard crime noir I just had kind of ignored, whatever. But it's a lot more in depth and a lot cooler than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one I definitely recommend from Open Letter.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Nice talking to you, Michael.
All right. Catch you later.